2 months ago, Iraq's own Ministry of Water Resources told the world the Euphrates would be completely dry by 2040. That was already unsettling enough. Then, without much explanation, they moved the number back. Not forward, back, to 2047. And I remember sitting with that thinking, that's the wrong direction. A country doesn't get less worried about its own river drying up. Something didn't add up. Then 8 weeks passed, just 8 weeks. And the same ministry came back with a new number, not 2047, not 2040, 2035, 9 years. That's what we're looking at now, if they're right. And if you do the math on how fast that number has been shrinking, 2047 to 2040 to 2037 to 2035, all inside a single year, you start to understand why I couldn't let this one go. I want you to sit with that for a second, the way I did the first time I saw it. Governments don't casually move a drought forecast backward by over a decade in 2 months, unless the ground itself is telling them something they didn't expect. Rivers don't lie to satellites. And when I went looking for why the number kept shrinking, I found something underneath that riverbed I wasn't prepared for. Something that, according to a text most people stopped taking seriously a long time ago, has been sitting down there for roughly 2,000 years, waiting for the water to leave. I need to show you what they found. Because once you see it, you won't look at a dry riverbed the same way again. There's a verse that gets quoted a lot when people talk about the Euphrates. And I want to read it to you exactly as it's written, because the wording matters more than people give it credit for. Revelation 16:12. The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east. Not flooded, not diverted. Dried up, on purpose, as preparation for something that hasn't happened yet. Here's what most people miss the first time they read that line. The river isn't the point. The river is the door. And a door only matters because of what's behind it. I keep coming back to something else, too. If you've ever looked at satellite images of the Euphrates from above, the shape of the riverbed, especially where it splits near its lower course, forms something close to the Greek letter omega. O. Now, I'm not going to pretend that's proof of anything on its own. But I can't unsee it once I know what omega means. It means the end. And there's a man in that same book of Revelation who says about himself, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. He wasn't speaking in riddles. He was telling you exactly who he was and exactly what shape the ending would take. So when a team of researchers went down into the exposed riverbed, into ground that hadn't seen open air in centuries, and they started finding structures, not just cracked mud, but rooms, corridors, chambers cut with intention, I understood why that discovery didn't sit right with me. Because there's a second verse, a few chapters later in the same book, that most people never connect to the first one. Revelation 9:14 and 15. Release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels who had been prepared for the hour and day and month and year were released to kill 1/3 of mankind. Bound. At the river. Prepared, waiting for a specific hour that hasn't come yet. For 2,000 years, nobody could get near that ground to check. It was underwater. Now it isn't. And what the researchers are describing, chambers, enclosures, something that looks less like a ruin and more like a holding place, is exactly the shape of a story that was written down before any of us were born. About something being kept on purpose until the water left. I don't know how you sit with something like that without your stomach dropping a little. I know I didn't. Here's the part that surprised me even more than the ground itself. People are noticing. Not just people like us, watching from a distance and reading old scripture. People inside the countries this river runs through. Iran currently has one of the fastest growing rates of conversion to Christianity anywhere in the world. Not a slow drift, a surge. And there's footage, hard to verify in full but circulating widely, of men in Iran throwing their own Qurans into moving water. Not out of anger, out of what they describe, when asked, as recognizing they'd been following something false their whole lives. In a country where that decision can cost you everything, your family, your freedom, sometimes your life. That's not a small thing. That's not a trend. That's people who looked at the same signs I'm showing you and decided the risk of staying quiet was worse than the risk of speaking. Now look at the river itself. Because you don't have to take my word for any of this. There's footage from 2020 of a stretch of the Euphrates, water almost reaching the roofline of a structure built along its bank. The same location, 1 year later. Dry. Not lower, dry. Barely a trace of water on the ground, where a building used to sit half submerged. That's the same verse I read you a few minutes ago, playing out in real time, on camera, 1 year apart. We are not at the part where the angel pours out the bowl completely, but we are watching the water leave the exact place the text said it would leave, at a pace nobody in that region predicted even 5 years ago. I think that's why the timeline keeps shrinking. I don't think it's a coincidence, and I don't think it's carelessness on the part of the people measuring it. I think the ground is moving faster than the models expected. And every time they update the model, the number gets closer to us. There's a second thread running underneath all of this, and it starts in Texas, of all places. The Torah describes a very specific animal, a red heifer, completely without blemish, never yoked for work, entirely red from nose to tail, that has to be sacrificed as part of the purification process before a new temple can be consecrated in Jerusalem. For most of modern history, that requirement has been treated as functionally impossible to meet. Cattle that are fully red without a single off-colored hair are almost never born. A cattle farmer, a Christian man in Texas, had exactly that happen. Not once. 3 separate calves, born red, spotless, matching the description almost line for line. When word reached certain rabbinical authorities in Israel, they didn't dismiss it. They arranged to have the animals shipped and inspected. And as of now, Israel has taken possession of red heifers that meet the ancient criteria closely enough to be taken seriously by people who have spent their entire lives studying exactly this requirement. I want you to think about what that means practically. The ashes from that kind of sacrifice are used in the purification rituals required before construction can begin on a third temple, which means the single biggest obstacle to that project, a requirement that hasn't been met in roughly 2,000 years, may no longer be an obstacle. And you already know what's happening in that region right now. The war, the fighting over Gaza, the disputes over land that go back generations. A lot of it gets explained in the news in political terms, borders and security and history. All of that is true. But underneath the politics, there's a religious current running through every decision being made in that region. And it centers on the same plot of ground, the same unfinished project, the same book that keeps describing what has to happen before the end can begin. 2 threads. A river drying faster than predicted. A temple requirement quietly falling into place. Different countries, different headlines. Same book, same timeline. There's a section of Revelation that describes 7 specific signs, released one after another. And I want to walk you through 2 of them, because I think you've already seen both with your own eyes without realizing what you were looking at. The first, a third of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. That's Revelation 8:7. Now think about the last few years. The wildfires that tore through Los Angeles, entire neighborhoods gone in a matter of hours. The Amazon burning for weeks at a time. Smoke thick enough to turn the sky over São Paulo black in the middle of the afternoon. Cities more than 1,000 miles from the fire line going dark under the smoke. People called those events climate patterns. And in a scientific sense, they're right. But the pattern and the prophecy aren't in competition with each other. They're describing the same fire from two different angles. The second sign is about water. A third of the sea, the rivers, the water sources, turning to something the text describes as blood, and later, something the text describes as wormwood. Bitter, undrinkable. I'm not going to tell you I know exactly what mechanism causes that. But I'll tell you what I do know. There is a tracked asteroid, confirmed by NASA, on a trajectory that current models place with a real, non-zero chance of striking Earth in 2032. And whether it's that object or something else entirely, the pattern the text describes, water becoming undrinkable on a scale large enough to matter to the entire world, is not a hard thing to picture anymore. It wasn't hard to picture in the year 2000 either. It just felt further away. That's the part that unsettles me most about all of this. None of it used to feel close. Now all of it does. Here's the sign that made me stop scrolling the news the day I first connected it. Revelation describes a coming army, 200 million strong, marching toward a field near a place called Megiddo, the origin of the word Armageddon. For most of history, a number like 200 million soldiers sounded almost like a poetic exaggeration, a way of saying more than anyone could count. No nation on earth could field an army that size, not even close. Then look at what's forming right now, in plain sight, reported in ordinary financial and political news, nothing hidden about it. An alliance of nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now expanding to include several more, coordinating economically and militarily in ways that didn't exist a generation ago. Combine the standing forces, reserves, and mobilizable populations of that bloc, and you are no longer talking about an exaggeration. You are talking about a number that, for the first time in recorded history, actually clears 200 million. Not metaphorically, numerically. I keep circling back to how specific that is. A text written roughly 2,000 years ago, describing a number that was physically impossible to reach for every generation that read it, right up until this one. But I don't want to leave you sitting only in the weight of that. Because the same book that describes the darkest sign also describes the last one. And the last one isn't dark at all. The seventh sign is the kingdom of God opening. Not destruction, but arrival. The text describes the sky itself giving way, and everyone, believer or not, seeing the same thing at the same moment. No confusion about what's happening. No more room for doubt either way. That's the part people leave out when they talk about all of this. The ending isn't only an ending. For the people who've been paying attention, it's also the thing they've been waiting for. I'll be honest with you about something. When I started putting all of this together, the river, the chambers underneath it, the heifers, the fires, the alliance forming in plain sight, I expected to find one strong sign and a lot of stretching to make the rest fit. That's usually how it goes with things like this. That's not what I found. What I found was a river that's drying faster every time they measure it. A temple requirement quietly resolving itself in Texas of all places. And an army that finally, for the first time in 2,000 years, has the numbers to exist outside of metaphor. None of those things needed me to connect them. They're already connected. I just followed the thread back to the same page they all came from, and that brings me back to where I started. 9 years. That's the number on the table right now, and it's been shrinking every time someone updates it. I don't think the point of any of this is to scare you into staying up at night. I think the point is a lot quieter than that. The water didn't leave overnight. It's been leaving slowly for years, while most of the world was looking somewhere else. That's usually how the things that matter most actually happen. Not all at once, but slowly enough that you only notice when you stop and measure how far it's already gone. Then 2040, then 2037, then 2035. I keep coming back to that shrinking number because I think it's the most honest thing in this entire story. Nobody had to convince the river to dry up faster. It just did. If this reached something in you, don't just scroll past it. Follow the channel and send it to 5 people who need to see the same thing you just saw. Leave a comment. Not the easy kind, the honest kind. Tell me where you actually stand on this. And tell me what you want me to dig into next. Because there's more underneath this than one video can hold. I'll see you in the next one.